أطفال الأرض السمراء ورد وأصفار. حي فيك الباسل ودرب المشوار، حي مفتاح الخيال وحي الأحرار، حي فيك الباسل ودرب المشوار. Welcome, early birds, Mona and Frank, to Zoom Palestine. We'll play another minute or so of music of the Intifada from 1989, since we seem to be having another one. So just be patient. Frank, I think you're in Patterson at the protest, and maybe we'll be able to see pictures of what's going on. And Mona is in Amman protesting. So it's global. So let's listen for a minute and see if anybody else comes on. يا ثورة شعبي شيلي بركان ونار، بكرة العودة يا بلاد العودة للدار، مخيم لمخيم جسر الثوار، قارون نوار، مخيم لمخيم جسر. Welcome, June and Charlotte. Hi, good to see you from the fabulous peace group, Brooklyn for Peace. Awesome people, awesome people. We're on with Mona Nafa in Amman, Jordan, my good friend from Amman, Jordan, from Palestinian. Hi, Mona. Hi.
Hi.
Alhamdulillah. She's a Jordanian American and very active. Her aunt, who may pop on also, is a very famous Palestinian artist working in Amman. And Frank Romano, the great peace activist, he's, I think, at a protest demonstration now in Patterson, New Jersey. And we have Karen, oh my God, my great friend from Jordan, who's now in DC. Hey, Karen, so good to see your name on there. Show us your face. This is wonderful, a Jordanian reunion. So I'm playing for a minute some music of the Intifada from 1989, which is quite beautiful and moving. So we'll wait another minute or so for more people to show up. Enjoy. Okay, so we'll start our meeting now. Karen, so good to see you there.
Yes,
And,
I'm trying to get my
yeah, we
camera.
don't hear you. Let me turn down the music sound. Hold on. Turn off the music actually, and stop the share for the time being, and put up the volume. Okay, now, so much is happening by the minute. I just got a text from my friend in Gaza, who gave me an update. I think it's 167 people killed now. Let me see if I can find his text. But it's just, what's going on is just unfreaking believable. But the good news is that mostly the world has been ignoring what goes on in Palestine. Here I just got from website, it's called the heavy attacks on Gaza started at 1 o'clock again this afternoon. Hi, Hugh, welcome. Okay. So we have people in Jordan, we have people in Washington, D.C., we have Frank at the demonstration in Patterson, and I'm in Manhattan. And I'm getting texts, the 197 deaths, according to my friend in Gaza, and 1,300 wounded so far. So I'm getting updates continually. I know you can't see when I try to show things on my phone. It's hard to see what's going on. But anyhow, this is from Gaza. My friend, I'm. Yeah, he's an artist, and I'm always happy when I get a text from him because I'm always worried he's not going to make it. The building got destroyed. So, Frank, are you in Patterson?
Yes, I am.
How is it there? What's happening? How's the demonstration there?
About 4 to 5,000 people.
Wow.
Alhamdulillah.
In
Fabulous.
Patterson, New Jersey?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
Patterson, New Jersey.
yeah. They have a big
Yeah, I
Arab
have friends.
in Patterson. Yeah.
Yeah. كتير عربية هون. كل عالم.
How many people do you think are in Bay Ridge?
I think I heard of 4,000 to 5,000 in Bay Ridge also yesterday.
I think there were that many.
Wow.
I was there. I
Yeah.
thought it was many fewer.
They shut down the BQE
Wow.
Really?
So there's protests in every American city. I think this is very hopeful. Boston, I know, has a huge protest.
Yeah, what's really
so I
good,
think that,
what's really good, Jackie, and everyone there, is it's a really united effort. We have people from the Jewish community, the Christian community, Black Lives Matter, even the Black Panthers Party, but so many people in solidarity together here. It's absolutely powerful. Alhamdulillah. Allah Karima.
I think that something's changed. I think all the hard work you've been doing, Frank, and all of us have been doing to try to lift the consciousness of Americans, I think finally is starting to pay off because this time they're not getting away with it without a lot of notice. What were they thinking by blowing up the building that has the media in it, by blowing up AP, Associated Press, Al Jazeera, CNN? What were they thinking? I mean, I'm wondering what's going on in there. My theory personally is that Netanyahu engineered this whole thing to stay out of jail, because if he could get a war going, he knew they would not put him in jail. The government would stay, and Benny Gantz, his main rival, would be off leading the war and can't replace him as president. So my theory is that all the stuff that's been going on for a couple months was designed to push the Palestinians to violence. Once you mess with the Alaska Mosque,
Yeah, that's right.
and you throw grenades at 1,000 people's brain, and then a lot of people don't know, but they have a clinic inside the mosque, and they were treating people inside the clinic in the mosque who had been hit by grenades, and then they went in and they threw grenades in the clinic in the mosque. So how would they not think this has to drive the Palestinians crazy?
Hey, Jackie, I think you can see me now. Can you see me?
I can. Yeah. Great. Yeah. Great. Oh, that's so wonderful to see. Wow. That's great, Frank.
Free Palestine!
Frank, how did you get out to Patterson?
Took a bus from Manhattan.
Bus? You took the bus? Great.
Yeah, I took a bus.
Yeah. I know a bus. I used to live in Jersey, so I
190 directly out here, really, from Manhattan.
Great.
It's not that far. I've ridden my bicycle to Patterson.
Oh, you have? Wow. Yeah, it's not far because I used to live near there. So anyhow, Mona, they had demonstrations in Jordan. Want to tell us?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm an Arab American from California, now residing in Jordan. My mother's Palestinian from Nablus, who was kicked out in '48, and my father a Jordanian, though a Palestinian activist. He was a spokesperson actually after 9/11 to give the Arab story. But here in Jordan, we are as active as the US, a huge demonstration today. Also, many Jordanians and Palestinians are going down to the border. We are technically an hour's drive from Amman to Jerusalem. An hour, 1 hour, 60 minutes. So if we didn't have the border, we could get to Jerusalem in an hour's time. But many Jordanians are with the Palestinians, even more so. As Jackie was saying, the narrative has changed. And I think what happened in the States with George Floyd and Black Lives Matters, that is transcending all over the world. So we have been experiencing the Palestinian injustice for many years here. When I cross the border on a personal note, I see it, it's blatant. Roads for Jews, roads for Palestinians. Palestinians do not have access to water or building permits to enhance their communities and neighborhoods. I've seen it with my eyes. You know, I go in and as an American, but what you hear about, read about is actually on the ground. So today, once again, we are sharing the news from here to the world. A lot of protesting daily at the Israeli embassy, which is in Rabia, probably about a 10-minute drive from my home. And everybody has their TVs, social media, media networks glued to the television. We get Al Jazeera. It's, you know, real time. And, you know, as Jackie was saying, what was the point of blowing up the media building? I believe they Israelis want to change the narrative and change the content of the media that's going out to make them look once again like the victim.
That's right.
Yeah. Mona,
Well,
so
that's a good reason to blow up the building.
yeah, Mona, tell me about the demonstrations planned to the border. Is that going to be down by the Dead Sea?
Yeah, it's near the so I was driving up from the Dead Sea on Friday, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cars going down, as well as the military, because the Jordanian military definitely has to get involved as not to have people, you know, get out of hand. I just read something that two Palestinians tried to cross the border but were arrested by the Israelis. So so far, we haven't had protest in front of the prime ministry, but a lot of heavy protest at the Israeli embassy once again. Nothing at the U.S. embassy yet, but, you know, heavily guarded. Daily, once again, the most effective is the Israeli embassy. But once again, on the weekend, first day, second day of Eid, you know, a lot of people went, instead of going on a family holiday, they went down to the border to express their solidarity to with the Palestinians.
So where are they protesting at the border?
They would go, you know, where Swayme is,
Yeah.
to the border towns. You know, we've got the longest border with Israel and Palestine. So to the fences, you know, it's really a stone's throw, excuse the pun, from Israel. You go down to the Jordan River where Jesus was baptized, and you're literally, 200, I'm thinking meters now, you know, about 500 meters from Israel. I mean, you're right there. And being in their face is annoying, with the Palestinian flags. And don't forget, we've got a significant population of Palestinians here residing, intermarriage, such as my parents. So a very strong Palestinian presence here.
Do you think there's any possibility of Jordan getting drawn into the war with Israel?
You know what? This actually conflict is a concern, being that there's a lot of activity between Jordan and Lebanon. And if the root of the problems are not addressed, then there has been talk. In fact, just today I heard a couple of news commentators that if Israel does not address the root, which is the unjust and the stealing of the land and, you know, building on Palestinian territory, you know, it's an inevitable, it could be a possibility, if I may.
Well, Jordan is in charge of the holy sites. So when Israel disrespects the Al-Aqsa Mosque, you know, the Jordan has to step up to, you know, what's the real level of protest Israel so far from the government, Jordanian government?
Well, it's continuous statements from the Jordanian government in our local media, and to from His Majesty to his allies and his friends. But technically, to go in, as a military and army, we don't want that to happen. Let's
They
put it
tried
that way.
that before and it didn't work. So
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of interest for us not to have a ground support. We've got Lebanon, Jordan, Syria. Nobody wants a full-scale war. But the root of the problem has to be addressed, and fingers crossed that it will be addressed this time around. Otherwise, it's just that ugly band-aid on a major wound.
Israel would win a full-scale war. I think that's why they're antagonizing as many people as they can. I think they would not want something to happen that will cause them to feel justified in slaughtering all the Arabs.
Well, as Jackie said, I've also heard the same comment that Netanyahu is distracting his criminal activities as well. So
Sure.
for him to continue on being the prime minister, not going to the courts, not being arrested, this is a major sideshow for him, so it won't happen. It's a continuous dehumiliation of the Palestinians, and once again, we all feel really different this time around. Unfortunately, it did take many deaths of African Americans for the world to really realize the unjust of the one with power to the minorities.
yeah, I think that this is there was a couple of interesting articles at the Times about the split in the Democratic Party over this, and the numbers that are coming out in the streets and the protests. And Hugh and Tom Cox is with us from Brooklyn for Peace. Welcome, Tom. Tom and all the members of the group have been giving people information on how to send letters out and giving sample letters to send to Congress and senators. And I think there's just been a barrage of protests about this. I think that Israel has made a big miscalculation, because I think what's happened is now Israel's revealed, it's been revealed to Israel that the world is no longer looking away from their misdeeds. Let's see, Frank, are you still at the protests? Maybe you can update us on the protests. I've never seen such huge protests around the country.
We're walking downtown Patterson, and the entire community seems to be here in solidarity with the Palestinians.
Frank, since you're in Patterson anyway, you ought to check out Patterson Falls. They're very beautiful.
Where?
Yeah.
Patterson Falls. It's walking distance from where you are.
Oh, okay.
It's gorgeous. Yeah.
Thank you. I didn't even know there were Patterson Falls, so that's new to me. I'll try to check it out before I return to Manhattan. Thank you.
Welcome.
Fadi, do you have any contact with people from Jerusalem? By the way, I met a woman online who worked with
Allahu Akbar.
Let me mute Frank because he's
Allahu Akbar.
okay. I'm working with a group. I'm going to be talking to them tomorrow, trying to get them to come on, called Adamir. They work with Palestinian prisoners. They're located in Jerusalem and Ramallah. And somehow I mentioned your name to her. I said, one of our friends in the group, I'm trying to get them to come on Zoom on our program. And I mentioned your name. Her uncle was your father's friend. Her name is, Milena. I sent you a text about it, but in Jerusalem, she knows your family in Jerusalem. So it's a small world. But Fareed, any contact with your family in Jerusalem? Are they okay?
They're okay. I haven't contacted them, but there's not much. Jerusalem is, pretty much controlled by the Israelis, so uh, they're okay. I think. I'm not sure, but I've been getting contacts from Gaza, and situation there is very bad. I mean, some of them are asking me for money, and I just didn't know what to say or do. Uh, they're sending me videos. They're sending me how the situation is so bad there, and I'm like, they're on my messenger, and I just don't know what to do. I was in Patterson. I just came back from Patterson. I was looking for Frank actually. Uh, uh, this is this keeps going on, and I was just watching Netanyahu on TV. He's saying we're just trying to defend the civilians and all that, and he's not addressing anything they're doing. I mean, demolishing a building, Al Jazeera.
It's ridiculous. Yeah, yeah.
They're completely justified.
Yeah, also too, go back to the government. Again, I think that definitely there's a change because there's a voice in the government with the, what do they call them? The not Fabulous Four or
Squad.
the Mob Squad. The squad. Yeah. The squad. So they are a voice for the Palestinians, for the minorities. And we never had that before.
Yeah.
So a positive step towards change. Change comes from the top. So the more that we can all push us on the bottom, pushing our representatives, the top, letters, phone calls, even from Jordan, we are sending letters. We have a huge American community here, sending letters to our representatives, bombarding them. The Israelis do it, the Jews do it, the Arabs will need to do it more and more, and not just stop when this is over, but to continue being accountable for the Palestinian causes.
Biden has a long history of supporting Zionism. Even in this latest thing, this latest eruption, the first thing that he said was Israel has a right to defend itself.
Yeah. And AOC said the Palestinians have a right to their lives.
Yeah.
Charlotte, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I think that last point that you made is one that we have to really emphasize about the issue of the right to self-defense, and that what Israel is doing now is absolutely not justified by self-defense, because I think that's what keeps the tax dollars flowing from the US to the Israeli military. So I think that's one thing. Besides supporting the McCollum bill, which we've been emphasizing, I think there's like the general point about, I think it's the Leahy bill that says that US tax dollars should be only used to sell weapons, or to weapons should only be sold to countries that are not violating human rights principles. And I think Israel keeps saying this is self-defense, and that's of course what Biden is parroting. But I think we have to really focus the conversation on that, and try to break through what is actually the a large number of Congress people who are saying, well, it's okay because they are defending themselves, and so I think we have to focus on that. That's like one thing. And the second thing I want to say is I think the demonstrations have been really fantastic, but I think they have not been reported at all, either in the Daily News or the New York Times. So I think those of us who read those papers need to write in letters to the editor saying, a demonstration of 5,000 people is nothing to sneeze at, and why aren't you even mentioning it? Because I think it's great that they're happening, but they need to really try to get them reported in the mainstream media as well as on the social media and other sorts of outlets.
Well, this has been an ongoing problem for the Palestinian issue for years. You can't use the P word. I mean, that's actually been written in emails to journalists. You cannot use the P word. I mean, so this has to be broken down, and I think it's starting to happen now. And politicians are politicians. Their conscience stops at the amount of votes. So that when they see demonstrations, 4,000 or 5,000 people, that's 4,000 or 5,000 votes. you know, that they're not going to get if they don't address, like Andrew Yang was such a jerk, was running for mayor, and he came out with this really stupid comment about Israel, and the Arabs went nuts and disinvited him from an Eid Iftar, the end of Ramadan, and now he's backtracking on it. But you know, the politicians will change their opinions if they think that the vote is going to go that way. So
Hey, Jackie, can you hear me?
yes, we can, Frank.
Yeah, I just want to add, with self-defense, every country, every people has the right to self-defense, but not under international law or local law, the disproportionate reaction to an attack. In other words, if someone slaps you on the metro, you have no right to kill that person with a machine gun. But that is exactly what's happening in Israel, and Obama in 2014 kept saying the same thing as Biden today, and they are absolutely misleading, and they both know that Israel has no right to do what it's doing. It has a right to self-defense, but this is not self-defense. This is criminal behavior. What is going on today will be added to our complaint as war crimes against Netanyahu, and we are adding Obama. And if Biden continues to do this, he will be added to the complaint as a war criminal, because he's been aiding and abetting Israel by saying, go ahead, you have the right to defend, but we'll send some money to Palestine. But this means that Biden is just as much as an accomplice as Obama if he continues to support Israel. He will be judged, hopefully a war criminal, because we have momentum now, as I'm one of the lawyers representing Palestine before the ICC in Holland. And inshallah, they will, Netanyahu, Gantz, Lieberman, Trump, Pompeo, and Obama will be condemned war criminals.
I think this is important to focus on the international law. Thank you, Frank, for that. That nuance. It's very, very important because the idea of proportionality is in international law, and Frank is one of the lawyers on the ICC, was condemning, talking about the war in Gaza in 2014 as being disproportional retaliation on the part of Israel, which violates international law.
Which is happening today as well. People all need to understand also, Jackie and everyone there, that at Sheikh Jarrah, these are already refugees. These Palestinians that worked out a deal with the UN to build their homes have been there for many years, but originally were already refugees from West Jerusalem, and I believe also from Jaffa and maybe Haifa. So what the settlers were doing with the support of the Israeli government were evicting already refugees and sending them out again in the diaspora against all international law. And why is it against international law? Because in Jerusalem, Israel is illegally, under international law, the occupier. And if you occupy another people, you have the responsibility to give them equal rights as the other people, the Jews. So that's equally unfair that these were refugees, turning them into refugees again, and clearly in violation of international law, where an occupier is taking advantage of occupied people, not protecting their rights, especially the right to live, the right to housing.
Yeah. One could feel very helpless about what to do, but one of the things that was interesting, Tom Cox sent, or was it Hugh? Somebody from Brooklyn Center sent that wonderful essay by that Jewish woman, Rothschild,
yeah.
a Harvard lawyer. Did you send it, Hugh?
Yes.
Yeah, it was a wonderful article, and it showed about not the change in Americans, but particularly the change that American Jews are ashamed and disgusted. Most of my Jewish friends are so disgusted, they don't want to talk to me about it because they're so embarrassed about it. Although I have some family members who are still supporting Israel, no matter what, they could drop a nuclear bomb on all of us and they would support Israel. But other Jews have just really had it, and they're finally starting to closet, which is very important. So I think we can think about how do we exploit this possibility. I want to share screen for a minute with you to show you some people who are doing some extraordinary stuff. So one of them is probably somebody, here's a picture, by the way. I think sharing the images, this is a picture of a little girl trapped in Gaza. There's so many wonderful images coming out. And I think, you know, a picture speaks 1,000 words. And I think it's very important. It's very easy to copy images. You just click on, you can copy the image, you can send it in an email, you can put it on your WhatsApp, your Facebook. But I think it's really important. Don't let people forget what's going on, and find as many images as you can and share them with people. Like what Mona said, you know, you just have to be in their face, just annoy them and be in their face. And this is a great site, you know, if Americans knew, you know, a wonderful thing that's led by Alison Weir. She has a newsletter, Israel Palestine News, and she has a lot of very good information. But one of the things she does is stay up to date with this brand new resource on Gaza that they built. And people, you know, argue, oh, well, they're shooting rockets in and this and that. But what is good, what I like about Alison Weir's If Americans Do website is it gives facts and statistics. They're big for data. And I think sometimes that you just have to shut people up with data. You know, these are updated. This is updated this morning, May 16th. All people of all ages killed since September 2000. Israel, less than 20, 160 at the top here. So you have to, how many children lost their lives, homes damaged or destroyed, that you need to mine the internet for data, because that's often very effective when people challenge you or argue with you, having a casual conversation. Just memorize a few statistics and throw them out at people. But this is a very good website to provide data. There's a great Twitter feed from On Palestine where you can find out all the demonstrations that are going on at hashtag Gaza under attack, hashtag defend Palestine. There are these places where you can find all kinds of stuff that's going on about demonstrations and protests. And again, you can get images and information. This is from Brooklyn yesterday. We have to kind of like train ourselves in being able to speak out to people. I mean, I know I encounter people. I have a red cap that looks like a MAGA cap, but it says Palestine on it, and it shocks people. I wear it out and people think I have a Trump cap on, and then they look at it, see it says Palestine. And very often they'll engage me, well, why are you wearing a Palestine cap? So you have to have statistics and information, things to say to people. I'm very shy. I hate arguing with people. I'm very neurotic because I grew up in a household where everybody argued, and my parents argued, and 5 marriages each, and I hid in the closet. So I don't like to talk, and I don't like to argue with people. But I'm fortifying myself with facts. Palestine Art Week. I don't know, did any of you guys get to see the film yesterday that they viewed? I sent a link out. It's downloaded. It's a history of Palestine. You gotta see this film. It's so great. It was done by a woman from Jordan. Mona, you may know her, Rawan. Oh, what the heck's her last name? I forget her last name. But they have a wonderful schedule online. You can register, it's free. I've been up to the museum up in it's near Yale, up in Connecticut, and it's just fabulous. And today it's it's called Al Nakba, the History of Palestine. It's Rawan Daman, is her name. She's from Jordan. Do you know her, Mona?
No, I don't, but you did send us a link. I will take a look at it.
But it's mind-blowing. I mean, I thought I knew a lot about Palestine. You know, I'm a historian. And I did those documentaries on Jerusalem, but she has stuff in there. She found these archival things hidden in the British Library, films of Palestine before 1948 that everybody thought was disappeared. There was no evidence. She tracked them down to places outside in Britain and I think in the United States. So she has incredible footage with incredible information.
You know, one of the tragedies that
Palestine, yeah, Palestine Museum in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, but they have really, she found hidden, they deliberately hid these films, you know, they didn't want to show all this stuff under the British mandate, all the stuff. The British were so awful. I mean, man.
Yeah.
So these are two film. There are 4 parts to the film. Four parts. I've seen part 1 and 2. Today they played part 2 and 3, but I was doing my church stuff. I couldn't do it. But they're really worth seeing because you will become a gold mine of information. You will find out stuff that you you don't know. And the guy Faisal Salah, who runs it, is a sweetheart. I went up to visit him last year, and it's worth the trip up to Connecticut. If I had when I get another car, inshallah, I'll drive up. Maybe Fareed, you might want to come up with me.
Metro North takes you right up there.
Yeah, it's lovely. It's right outside Yale. It's not hard to get to. So that's another great resource. But I recommend those 2 films. And for a couple minutes, I thought I would show. We don't have that much time left, but did any of you get to look at the DDN interview with Jeremy Corbyn, Mustafa Barghouti, Linda Sarsour, and Andrew Feinstein yesterday? That was another link. Okay, this is out of Australia, guys. It's global. You know, the world is like sick and tired, and they finally, I think what Mona said, that the Black Lives Matter just kind of pinched everybody awake to things. But I'm going to just show you a couple minutes of this because this documentary is very, very important. Does anybody want to say anything else before I start? Documentary.
Palestine. We have witnessed the symbolic Al-Aqsa Mosque turned into a battleground by Israeli security forces, airstrikes carried out across Gaza, and even a live televised lynching of a Palestinian man who was pulled from his car in Tel Aviv. Tonight, to discuss this and more, we are joined by a panel of distinguished voices from across the globe, and it is a great privilege to introduce them to you now. Firstly, let me introduce Mustafa Barghouti. Mustafa, thank you very much for joining us. Mustafa is the Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative, an elected member of the Palestinian Legislative Council since 2006. We thank you incredibly, Mustafa, for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
And also allow me to introduce Jeremy Corbyn, the Member of Parliament for Islington North and former leader of the UK Labour Party. Jeremy, thank you very much for joining us as well.
My pleasure, and it's wonderful to be on a programme with Mustafa, who is a wonderful, brave leader of the Palestinian people. I've got so much admiration for him, and it was wonderful to talk to him this morning and be able to relay his message to the huge rally in London this afternoon. Mustafa, I know it's a hard time for you, but you've got a lot of friends, a lot of support all around the world.
Thank you, very kind. Thank you so much. Thank you for your solidarity, which is always strong and courageous. Thank you so much.
I'm also pleased to introduce Linda Sarsour, who in many ways needs no introduction. Linda is the co-founder of the Women's March, a Palestinian-American organizer and activist who has protested the police surveillance of American Muslims and who served as the lead plaintiff in a challenge against the legality of Donald Trump's travel ban. Thank you for joining us, Linda, who is also the author, I should mention as well, of We Are Not Here to Be Bystanders. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you so much to double down. And I'm also very humbled and honored to be here with Mr. Corbyn, Mr. Barghouti.
And finally, let me introduce Andrew Weinstein, who is a former member of the National Assembly of South Africa. elected as a member of the ANC. During his time in the parliament, Andrew became the first South African MP to introduce a motion relating to the Holocaust. And he is also the author of Shadow World, Inside the Global Arms Trade. We obviously have a number of panelists with us tonight, and I want to make sure that we give them all the space and time to respond to questions, and importantly, to respond to one another as easily as they can. But first, if I may, I would like to come to Mustafa to ask you about what you have witnessed over the last week or two, and to explain to our viewers what is happening on the ground now, and to offer an update, if possible, to our audience.
Thank you. Well, it's an interesting coincidence that we are meeting today on the day of the Nakba, the day of the Palestinian catastrophe, as we call it, when in 1948, the Israelis practiced ethnic cleansing against the Palestinian people, unfortunately benefiting from what became called the Balfour Declaration, where the British government at the time gave the Israelis the opportunity to build a state on the land of Palestine, and at the expense of the Palestinian people. At that time, no less than 900,000 Palestinians were displaced, ethnically cleansed, and they became what we know now as 6.5 million Palestinian refugees living in the diaspora and unable to come back to their homeland. On this day, I think it coincided with an Israeli attack on Palestinians that started about a month ago in Jerusalem with two things. First of all, preventing Palestinians from their natural access to Al-Aqsa Mosque, to Jerusalem, especially during Ramadan, where Palestinians like, and like many Muslims would like to go and pray in the Aqsa Mosque. So most Palestinians in Gaza and West Bank were prohibited from entering Jerusalem. But even those who entered from Jerusalem itself, and those who managed to sneak in without permits, like I did a few times, were subjected to attacks by the Israeli illegal settlers and the Israeli army. And what promoted a lot of anger in Palestine are the scenes of Israeli army invading the mosque, attacking people while they were peacefully praying, shooting them with metallic rubber-coated bullets, and then throwing at them stun grenades, and in certain occasions even using high-velocity bullets, beating people and dispersing them out of the mosque. This led to serious injuries. About 1,000 people were injured during these days. Some of them are still in critical conditions, and at least 8 people have lost their eyes because of these bullets that the army is using. The second parallel thing was in Sheikh Jarrah, which is a Palestinian neighborhood in East Jerusalem, where the inhabitants who live there have been granted housing by United Nations Relief and Work Agency. And they were there because these people who live in Sheikh Jarrah have originally been displaced from their original homes in 1948. Some of them are from Jaffa, some of them are from West Jerusalem, some of them are from other parts of Palestine. So they are living in Sheikh Jarrah in these houses. And now the Israeli settlers, with the support of the Israeli government, came in and wanted to ethnically cleanse them one more time from their homes. Another time after they have been ethnically cleansed in 1948, with no justification whatsoever. And that created a second spot of clashes, of course, with the Israeli army and settlers, because Palestinians insisted to stay in their homes and not leave. This created a lot of protests and solidarity with the people of Sheikh Jarrah. And when Israel proceeded with attacking the people there, and when Israel announced that there will be a march of thousands of illegal settlers into Jerusalem and into the old city of Jerusalem, where they could attack Palestinian homes, Hamas declared in Gaza that they would respond with the military action unless Israel stops that march. Israel did not respond, and there was a rocket shot in the area around Jerusalem, and then the new cycle started with Gaza, where the Israeli army mobilized a huge amount of force. During the last 6 days, they have been using 160 military jet fighters, 160 F-16 and F-15 jet fighters who are throwing rockets on the population of Gaza, as well as Navy ships and tanks and artillery. Of course, Palestinian resistance responded with shooting rockets back, but so far it's been a massacre, a bloodbath, which in my opinion, Netanyahu is using, and he's using the Palestinian blood to stick to power. In my opinion, he provoked this whole situation because he's afraid of losing his status as prime minister and then be subjected to 3 cases of corruption where he can end up in jail. So this man is using Palestinian blood, and I would say even Israeli blood, to stay in power. But the result is really horrible. Up till this moment, 9 Israelis were killed, but 145 Palestinians were killed in Gaza, including 41 children and 23 women. And about 1,100 people were seriously injured. The Israeli planes and tanks and artillery are now destroying not only people's lives, but they are also destroying the whole infrastructure. They attacked electricity grids. Gaza now is almost with no electricity whatsoever. They attacked water resources. They attacked even sewage systems. They have been destroying and attacking people's homes and high-rise buildings where hundreds of people have lost their homes. And most recently, just today, they destroyed a high-rise building, which is 14-floor building, which includes all the major offices of media and journalism in the Gaza Strip, including the headquarters of Associated Press, the American Associated Press, and Al Jazeera broadcasting facility. Also, the Israeli army bombarded with artillery and with tanks the northern parts of Gaza and forced people to be evicted from their homes. No less than 10,000 people were obliged to become refugees one more time, and they are now taking shelters in UNRWA schools. In addition, Israel have, and that's what's something that I'm feeling very sad about. Really, Israel has liquidated, literally liquidated, annihilated 14 families in Gaza. These families are non-existent anymore. The whole family, the father, the mother, the grandfather, the grandmother, the children. 14 families have vanished. And the last one was today, when they attacked the family in beach camp and killed 10 people, including the father, the mother, and 8 children. And the only one who remained alive from that family is a 2-month-old boy. I don't know what future he will have. But that is the policy of banned land as Netanyahu is conducting. This has resulted, I'm sorry if I'm too long, but I will be quick. This has resulted in an uprising also in the West Bank and inside 1948 areas, which is called Israel today. Palestinians have become unified in one uprising. And in the West Bank, we had yesterday demonstrations in 200 places. I was in a couple of them. But the Israeli army responded to these peaceful, non-violent demonstrations because the people in the West Bank are not armed. We just demonstrated, protested peacefully. They responded to us with high-velocity bullets and all kinds of stun grenades and tear gas, etc. So far, 11 Palestinians have been killed yesterday. 1,700 were injured in one day. And of those, 183 up till now were hit with live ammunitions, which means that many of them could die. The Israeli army, whenever asked about why they do this, they say because we are shot at with rockets. But in West Bank, there are no rockets, and nobody shot them with rockets. Clearly, they wanted to destroy the ability of Palestinians to resist this terrible occupation and this terrible system of apartheid. If you compare the number of Israelis killed, and I don't want anybody to be killed, but the number is 9 to 166 Palestinians who have been killed so far, and the operation goes on. And that is a reflection of the major problem. This is another cycle of confrontation that is happening mainly because we have been subjected to Israeli military occupation for 54 years, the longest military occupation in modern history. And we've been subjected to something that has evolved as the worst system of apartheid and racial discrimination conducted by Israel. That system of apartheid and persecution is affecting not only Palestinians in the occupied territories, but also Palestinians, the 1.8 million Palestinians living in Israel itself, and the 6.5 million Palestinians who live in the diaspora. In reality, this is the worst system of apartheid, and it has been classified by Human Rights Watch, which is a highly respected human rights international organization, and even by B'Tselem, which is an Israeli human rights organization. The Israeli policy and the real system has been classified as a system of persecution and apartheid, both of which represent war crimes according to international law. At this time, International Criminal Court is investigating Israeli war crimes, and now Israel is committing another round of crimes. This would not have happened if the world community have not been silent about Israeli violations and crimes. This would not have happened if the world community had interfered, and would not allow or did not allow Israel to be impunitive to international law and to be above international law. That's why we are so grateful to you, Jeremy, and all other friends in Britain today for the fantastic demonstrations you organized today with the participation, as I understood, of 100,000 people. This solidarity is what we need at the moment, because we need to break this cycle of oppression, and the time has come for Palestinians to be free. And we are determined to be free. We will not allow this oppression to continue. We have the right to be free. We have the right to dream about being free, and we have the right to be equal to everybody else in this world. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your powerful contribution, and hundreds of comments coming in, I should say, sharing their solidarity as well, and lots of people based in London saying that they were at the march today as well. Just before I bring you in, Linda, to respond perhaps to some of the points that were made there, I want to draw quickly, if I may, on a point that Mustafa raised about the levelling of the Al Jazeera building in particular, and just play a clip to our viewers of Al Jazeera themselves broadcasting the destruction of their own building. Just a warning, obviously, that this video contains the attack on that building.
That building is where Al Jazeera's offices are. There we are, another strike on that tower. And the tower has come down. That is the Al Jala Tower. That tower is where Al Jazeera's offices are warehoused. The Associated Press offices were also housed in that building. Whenever you see journalists doing live updates from Gaza, they're usually standing on the roof of that building, which has now been flattened in an airstrike by the Israeli military.
Linda, could I come to you on that point, just off the back of what Mustafa has said, but also in particular the attack there on journalists in Gaza?
The Israeli government has never had any regard for media, for journalists, for nurses, for doctors, for children, for elders. So unfortunately, nor we nor the people of Gaza are surprised by watching an entire tower full of media outlets leveled to the ground. the important thing here, Liam, is that what we're seeing now, what the whole world is watching now here in, whether it be in Gaza or in the West Bank or within the 1948 lines, is the life of Palestinians almost on a daily basis. The people of Gaza have been living in an open air prison for almost 2 decades now. The people of the West Bank live under a brutal military occupation. The people, the Palestinians within the 1948 lines are treated as second and third class citizens. So I'm sad, I'm outraged. I can't always find the right words, but what I do feel is hopeful, knowing that the world is watching, the world is seeing the pain of the Palestinian people, seeing the trauma that they endure almost on a daily basis, and they cannot turn away. You cannot look away from what you are seeing happening now on the ground in Palestine.
Thank you, Linda. And just before I bring Jeremy in, particularly to respond, if I may, on the sort of British response to the current escalation, I want to play a clip from LBC from today, which is a British radio station where you have this incredible moment where the host is asking a resident in Gaza about Hamas rockets as Israeli bombs fall in the background of the clip. I just want to play that for our guests and also for our viewers.
As someone who lives in Gaza, are you comfortable with Hamas firing rockets against Israel? Do you think that is a solution to your problems?
I'm not here to speak about Hamas's rockets. I'm here to speak about this grave, long injustice.
That was something, yeah? That was an explosion, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Are you okay? Ooh, that's getting a bit closer.
I'm okay, but my kids are down, and I hope they're going to be okay.
If you want to, if you need to go,
no, it's okay. No, it's fine. Are
you sure?
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Jeremy, if I can bring you in, I mean, the British government and the British media only seem to get interested in the situation in Palestine as soon as Hamas fire a rocket. I mean, is James Cleverly, the British Minister for the Middle East, right when he says that this is all about Hamas? I mean, from that clip, it certainly doesn't seem that way, does it?
No, it's complete nonsense. The issue is that the Palestinian people have been under occupation since 1967. That was the year I left secondary school. The whole of my life, since becoming an adult, so to speak, the Palestinian people have been under occupation. And that is fundamentally what the issue is. Now, I don't want anybody killed. I don't want any bombs. I don't want any rockets. I want peace. But you're only going to get that with recognition of the Palestinian people. And that means ending the occupation, ending the settlements, removing the settlements, ending the siege of Gaza, and also recognizing the rights of Palestinian refugees who've lived their whole lives in Jordan, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Iraq. Every country all around the Gulf, there are Palestinian refugees who have lived their whole lives like that. I went to Sabra and Shantilah some years ago with the late Sir Gerald Kaufman, who was then a Labour MP. He's passed on now. And he was a Jewish man, was actually, for much of his life, very pro-Israel. And he was more and more disgusted at the treatment by the Israeli forces of Palestinian people. And we went to the refugee camps in Lebanon together. I've never forgotten meeting an old man whose whole life, since being a very small child, had been in this refugee camp since 1948, his whole life. And he had this dream that one day he'd be able to return to the village he was expelled from in 1948. And so there is a big human story here, and I think that has to be said. But the events of the past week have been unbelievable and extraordinary. As Mustafa said, there are no rockets being fired from the West Bank. People are being killed on the West Bank. The Israeli occupation forces are destroying homes, destroying families, destroying people. The bombing of Gaza is incredible. You have first world military planes bombing Gaza and destroying those buildings. And that building that was destroyed today, the Al Jazeera and Associated Press offices, that was scientifically destroyed by an air raid. The big building that was destroyed the other day contained many other organizations. I've been in those buildings during visits to Gaza in the past. There can be no possible justification under any rules for that. Israel is in breach of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Israel is in breach of its obligations as an occupying power. And the world has got to wake up. And that means ending military cooperation with Israel. And I have questions for the British government on the degree of military cooperation with Israel. Ending all arms supplies and arms imports from Israel. Because what we see is the destruction of the lives of Palestinian people. Today in London, over 100,000 people marched. It was in fact very hard to get to the stage to deliver my speech today because the crowds were so dense all down Kensington High Street. That was London. There was also demonstrations in Liverpool, in every major city, in Scotland and in Wales, all over Britain. And so 100,000 is the London figure, but to that you should add many more. Why were they there? They were there because they are human beings with sympathy and support and recognition that there has to be a political solution, and that requires the British government to act by recognizing unilaterally, unconditionally, totally recognizing the state of Palestine. To do that at the United Nations, as many other countries have done, and go through the points that I made about settlements, end the siege, and have some regard for the needs and rights of refugees. So I think the world has become more aware over the last day. Now, I'll finish on this point because obviously you need to bring in Andrew and others. But the decision to destroy a building containing the offices of two major media organizations, Al Jazeera, Associated Press, that is an attack on those that report what is going on in Gaza. Now, I've been to Gaza on a number of occasions, and I've met people, I've met young people, I've met children, I've visited schools, I've been in lots of places in Gaza. And it's the most educated place in the world. I think 2/3 of the population have university degrees. Unemployment is even higher at 70%. It's very strange being in this educated enclave, living under permanent fear. Insufficiency of water, insufficiency of electricity, insufficiency of medical care, lack of COVID vaccines, etc., etc., etc. And then when the power is off, the building you're in Gaza, you can look, if you're in Gaza City, to the north, and you see the bright lights of Ashkelon. You look to the east, you see the lights of various villages and so on in Israel. It's like putting a whole people under prison. It's got to end. I've done many debates, calls, meetings, and so on with a lot of people in Israel. A lot of people are in left organizations, in human rights groups and others in Israel who would agree with every word I've said today. They are appalled. They want to be able to live in that region in peace with full recognition of the Palestinian people. That fundamentally is what it's about. And the British government better wake up to what public opinion is now in this country.
Thank you, Jeremy. I would like to return shortly, if possible, to Linda and a question about Joe Biden, but I want to make sure that I bring Andrew in because I think Andrew has a really interesting sort of take on this. Obviously, Andrew, Mustafa noted the recent Human Rights Watch report that found Israel to be an apartheid state. You have previously spoken to Double Down News, but also other media outlets, of course, about the experience of apartheid South Africa, of serving in that first democratically elected government under Nelson Mandela. What do you make of the recent escalation within that context?
Thanks, Lee. I mean, first, may I say what an honor it is to be in this panel with such esteemed and courageous fellow panelists. How different the British response would be today to the tragic events in Gaza if Jeremy Corbyn was our Prime Minister. Before I talk about the comparisons with South Africa, let me remind you that Britain has sold over £400 million of weaponry to Israel since 2015. Many of those bombs and missiles, many of the aircraft that are used to drop them, many of the drones that are manufactured, even by the Israeli company Elbit Systems, are actually manufactured in the United Kingdom. We're probably second only to the amount of arms that have been sold by the United States to Israel. With our tax pounds, with our tax dollars, we are effectively enabling and facilitating the appalling destruction of human life that is taking place in Gaza. My former boss, Nelson Mandela, after 27 years in prison, emerged not to say that we are all free, but instead to say our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people and many Palestinian organizations were comrades of the ANC and other liberation movements in the struggle to end apartheid in South Africa. But what we have seen in Israel over the past few years, and more intensively over the past few days, is a degree of racism, a degree of brutality and inhumanity that I believe surpasses what the South African apartheid state did to the vast majority of our citizens. It is tragic for me as a Jew, the son of a Holocaust survivor who lost 39 members of her family in Auschwitz and Theresienstadt. As a South African who has seen at first hand, albeit from a position of privilege, bestowed on me only by the virtue of the accident of the color of my skin at birth, I have seen the consequences of racism and of apartheid. Israel is a racist and apartheid state. Our governments in the United Kingdom, in the United States of America, across Europe, have to immediately embargo any form of arms sales, of military cooperation with the state of Israel. The lives of innocent, ordinary Palestinian people depend on it. And every minute that we don't do that is going to result in further death, further destruction, and further immiseration. The parallels, I think, have gone beyond what we experienced in South Africa. This is the South Africa of the 1960s, where unarmed women protesting against having to carry identification books were mowed down by apartheid policemen. This is actually killing women, children, and other innocent civilians in their homes, in their streets, randomly and wantonly. For all of us who regard ourselves as anti-racists, for all of us who reject the abuse of human rights, for all of us who defend the right to life, of every human being. We have to stand up and take a stand against what the Israeli government is doing today and what the Israeli government has been doing since 1967 at least, and even before that. For, as my esteemed friend and Nobel Peace Laureate Archbishop Desmond Tutu said, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor.
Thank you, Andrew, for your powerful contribution. Linda, if I can turn back to you on the question of Joe Biden, if it's okay with you, I'm just going to remind our viewers of what Joe Biden's response was yesterday or the day before when he was quizzed about this by US reporters.
And I had a conversation with Bibi Netanyahu, and not so long ago. I'll be putting out a statement very shortly on that. My expectation and hope is that this will be closing down sooner than later. But Israel has a right to defend itself when you have thousands of rockets flying into your territory.
I think, as Andrew pointed out, a lot of UK money, but also a lot of US taxpayers' money. I think something like $10 million a day is going to Israel. And, it'd be great to get your thoughts on Joe Biden's response in general, but also, is that money well spent considering, that the US can't even provide healthcare for its own people?
Liam, I am ashamed of the President of the United States, and I have been ashamed of many presidents of the United States in my lifetime for their unequivocal support for the state of Israel. It is why in the larger progressive movements here in the United States, we make a connection between the struggle for Palestinian liberation and the struggles of other marginalized people here in the United States. As you just mentioned, we have been fighting for Medicare for all, for a healthcare system that ensures that all Americans and all people who reside in the United States have access to health care. They tell us we're idealistic. They tell us we don't have the resources to build schools in Chicago or to keep clinics open in parts of the country. They tell us we don't have money for infrastructure and we don't have money for access to higher education. But we have millions of dollars and trillions over the last decade to send to Israel to continue the brutal, illegal occupation of the Palestinian people. The spokesperson for Joe Biden, Ned Price, should be ashamed of himself when he was asked multiple times and pressed multiple times by American journalists about the Palestinian children who are being massacred, whether or not Palestinians too have a right to defend themselves. And I say here as a Palestinian, but also as an American, that I believe that the Palestinian people have a right to defend themselves and that we as taxpayers need to stand up and come together and demand that Congress could either, I will say end all military aid to Israel. So let me be clear about my own position, but at the very least to condition military aid to the Israeli government. We do have a piece of legislation here that's been presented by Congresswoman Betty McCollum from the great state of Minnesota. It's a bill that basically conditions aid to Israel and says that Israel cannot use taxpayer dollars to continue annexation, to detain Palestinian children. And even that, Liam, is controversial. The thing that really outrages me, and I talk about this all the time, is we can criticize any nation in the world. As you know, I am known here in the United States as one of the most prominent progressive activists. And every day when I wake up in the morning, I critique the US government. I organize around progressive legislation. I elect progressives into office. And I criticize my country because I love the United States of America. And I know that we have the potential to be better and to do better. For some reason, when you are critiquing the state of Israel, it becomes controversial. We are silenced here in the United States of America. Our voices are marginalized. We also have, it's not just, rhetoric, it's actual pieces of legislation that are passed across the country to stop our efforts of engaging in boycott, divestment, sanctions of the state of Israel. We don't know what's left to do. We don't want Palestinians to defend themselves. We abhor and condemn violence. But when the Palestinian civil society comes up with a solution that is nonviolent, like boycott, divestment, sanctions, that too becomes controversial. And there are actual people in power who are suppressing our constitutional rights to engage in that type of activity. And so I'm ashamed of Joe Biden. And to be clear for folks who are watching here from the United Kingdom or even folks in the United States of America, none of us who are working to oust Donald Trump from the presidency of the United States of America believed that somehow Joe Biden was some champion for marginalized people or thought that Joe Biden was going to be a champion or different on Palestine. Unfortunately, we had some very hard decisions to make because we truly believed that Donald Trump and those that were around him were fascist. They were terrorizing immigrant communities in this country. We were watching how emboldened white supremacists were becoming in the United States of America. We watched the moving of the embassy under the Donald Trump administration. So we were working to remove Donald Trump, but we never believed that Joe Biden was going to be a champion on foreign policy. What we're hoping happens here in the United States is that over the next 4 years that we continue to build political power, that we continue to change the hearts and minds of the American people. And that when we come to 2024, that we could really put somebody in office that truly aligns with our values and principles. And Liam, we started to see that our work and the fruits of our labor. Just the last few days, you watched members of the United States Congress on the House floor giving speeches that we'd never heard before, that literally it was historic watching Congresswoman Cori Bush from Ferguson and St. Louis, Missouri, watching Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and Mark Pecan and watching, so many, Jan Chakowski, watching Mary Newman, watching, so many members of Congress, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, of course. So this is something that we haven't really seen in our lifetime. And so our organizing works, our organizing is producing for us. And so I am calling on our movements to stay steadfast, to continue to speak up for the Palestinian people. And if you didn't know about what was happening in Palestine, you do know now, and you cannot turn away from us now and from the Palestinian people. And so that is the kind of hope that I have in this moment, that we're truly coming to a moment where the work that people have done for decades, including Mustafa Barghouti and so many others that have been talking about Palestine, the many Palestinian elders in the United States that have been working towards this moment, we are finally seeing some of the fruits of our labor. Of course, that means that our people in Palestine, in Gaza and in the West Bank continue to live under terror. They continue to be humiliated, dehumanized, murdered, but the Palestinian people are a resilient people. They are a people that teach life. Even amidst this trauma, even amidst this terror, we watch them still go to Jerusalem and still try to celebrate Eid, which was the end of Ramadan. We are watching the children of Palestine speaking up, telling their stories. We are watching the usage of social media to show the atrocities that are happening to the Palestinian people. And so while my heart mourns, while my heart is broken, I know many of you are feeling the same, I still feel hope and resilience and very proud to be a Palestinian American, a first generation. My family and both my parents are from a village in the West Bank called El Bire. And I have had the honor to go back to Palestine many times and to be able to be in a land, to understand the importance of land to the Palestinian people. Being a granddaughter of a Palestinian woman who watched me as a Palestinian American stand on the biggest stage in this country at the Women's March on Washington. Rashida Tlaib is our great-great-grandmother's wildest dreams manifested. So I'm feeling hopeful, Liam.
In the Congress and go to Mustafa on this point about some of the differences. Obviously, in the US, there are elected representatives now who are sending solidarity, speaking out that we may not have seen before. But on the ground, of course, this isn't the first time that Israel has decided to land grab and evict Palestinians, if we want to use that word, and attack Gaza. But the Israeli government has accepted, Mustafa, in some ways that it is facing what it calls, or what it has called, issues on multiple fronts. That this isn't just a bombardment of Gaza, but that it is facing resistance and protest within 48, within Israel proper. In what way is this different, perhaps, to what you have seen before?
Well, it's a lot. There are lots of differences, and as we have expected, there was a low moment in Palestine where people were feeling depressed and unhappy, especially during Trump's time and the plans of liquidating the Palestinian cause completely. People were unhappy about the behavior of the Palestinian Authority, which has put all its hopes in what they call Oslo Agreement, and they put their hopes in useless negotiations which have been going on for 28 years without any result, except one, which is the expansion of settlement activities, and the number of settlers have increased from 110,000 when Oslo Agreement was signed to more than 750,000 today. We've witnessed how the West Bank was stuck by Israeli illegal settlements, 650 military checkpoints, a wall that is separating people from each other, and the practically fragmentation of the West Bank in 224 small islands separated from each other by settlements, settlers, as well as checkpoints. We've watched Gaza becoming the largest open prison, as Jeremy has described it, without the world doing much. An area with 140 square miles, 25% of which is prohibited for people by Israeli army, which is watching from outside, and besieged by the Israeli army. The borders, which controls the borders, controls the sea, controls the airspace, and 2.1 million people living in this densely populated area, as was also mentioned, with 80% of people unemployed, 80% of educated young people unemployed, a very low GDP per capita, less than $1,000, about $800 per capita per year, in comparison, by the way, to $42,000 per capita per year for Israelis. And that situation, of course, was causing a lot of depression. And I was always hopeful, and I was always saying to people, wait a minute and you will see what will happen. The explosion's coming. And that's very similar to what happened in 1987. It was a very similar situation when the first Intifada erupted. What we've seen today in Palestine is very similar, but much better even than what happened in 1987. It's much better in the sense that for the first time, all Palestinians, regardless of whether they live in the West Bank or Gaza, or whether they live in Jerusalem or in Tel Aviv or Jaffa or Haifa or Raqqa inside the 48 areas, or they live in Jordan and Lebanon, for the first time since the first Intifada, you see that they are all united, with one major difference. In 87, the people inside in 48 areas were showing solidarity with the people in the West Bank and Gaza. This time, it's not solidarity. It's joint struggle, complete joint struggle of all Palestinians. How did this happen? It happened exactly because of what Andrew have described, and I thank him so much for telling the people the truth about the fact that the apartheid in Palestine is much worse than in South Africa. It happened because finally all Palestinians realized that they are all subjected to the same system of oppression, to the same system of discrimination, to the same system of brutality, with some differences, of course, but in general, it's one apartheid. And it has created a unified Palestinian struggle against this apartheid. That is what's different today. And one more thing, Palestinians have always been resilient, have always been able to be steadfast and stay on their land. And by the way, this is the main reason why the Zionist movement is failing, because we did not run away, because we insisted to stay even when we had to be arrested or be tortured or be brutalized. Because people stayed, this level of resilience and resistance has reached a level that is also unprecedented. That is a major difference, and that's what makes me hopeful. But I would add to that the success of the BDS movement, the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, because it has provided the people, the Palestinians who live in the diaspora, with an effective material method or material way of participating in the struggle, a method that cost Israel a lot. And it has provided our international partners and those in solidarity with us with an effective method of translating in their solidarity into a material effect. At the end of the day, this is what's going to change the situation. The Palestinian struggle on the ground, as has happened in South Africa, the struggle of the people on the ground was the most important factor, but also with a strong boycott, divestment, sanctions campaign worldwide. The case of Israel is more difficult than the case of the apartheid system in South Africa for many reasons. One being the history, one being the Holocaust, etc., which of course we never denied, and we were always against that fascist behavior against Jewish people. But Israeli system, Israeli apartheid system is abusing this memory, abusing this terrible tragedy to justify their persecution and brutality against the Palestinian people. And I always say, these people who are oppressing us are not the victims of the Holocaust. These are different people. And we should not allow them to abuse the memory and the dignity of Jewish people who struggled against oppression and who survived the Holocaust. They should not, these people who are oppressing us should not be allowed to abuse that memory and harm it actually by their behavior.
Jeremy, if I can come to you on the point that was raised by Linda and also by Mustafa on the resistance, really, that, you know, we talk a lot about obviously the rockets and the horrific scenes that we are seeing every single day. But is it worth remembering that the main avenue of resistance for Palestinians is and always has been life itself, as in giving birth and living to fight another day? Do we not talk about that nearly enough? The hope that Linda spoke about briefly before.
Ever talk enough about the reality of life under occupation? Now, I've never lived under occupation, and I hope I never do. But in all the visits I've made to Palestine, it's the humiliation of the daily grind of checkpoints, of a military presence, and so on. I'll give you a couple of examples. My wife Laura and I went to Jericho on one visit. Jericho is a fascinating, beautiful, very interesting place. And we met some people in Jericho, and then we started on our journey back to Jerusalem, where we were staying. We were staying in the old city. And it took us about 6 hours. Checkpoints, delays, checkpoints, delays, rudeness, abuse, etc., etc. And it was winter time, and it was quite cold, and it was quite miserable. And then we got to Abu Dis to come back into Jerusalem. It's not far, just down the road. And for some reason, no reason was offered. The checkpoint was closed and we couldn't leave Abu Dis. So I went into the town itself, which is just a few hundred meters away from where the checkpoint was. And we're stuck outside wondering what to do. And we're outside a place that was selling hot nuts. Young Palestinians had set up a little business there. It was doing quite well, I should say. And they saw us outside and they said, "What are you doing?" We said, "Well, we're waiting for the checkpoint to reopen and then we're going to go back to Jerusalem." So they said, "Come in." We went into their place. They gave us tea, they gave us food, and they wouldn't let me pay. They said, "No, you're here in solidarity with us. We cannot accept your money." And I said, "Look, you need to close up the shop. We'll just go and wait until the Israelis are good enough to open up the checkpoint again." They said, "No, no, you're now our responsibility." And they stayed with us for hours in order to make sure they could see us safely through to where we had to go. That was, and I thought, okay, this is wonderful the way we're being treated, but this is the sort of daily grind of people trying to get around. Another occasion, I was monitoring the presidential election as a UN accredited observer. And as I was going through the checkpoint between Ramallah and Jerusalem, I was going through one way, and Mustafa didn't know it, but he was coming through the other at the same time as me. And he was a presidential candidate, somebody that should always be treated with respect, but he thought at the very least you would ensure that your presidential candidates can get around. He was delayed deliberately, humiliated deliberately, abused deliberately. And that is what happens day in, day out, all the time. And you look at the sadness on the eyes of building workers in Gaza in the days when they could work in Israel, being delayed for hours from 2 in the morning to get through a checkpoint in order to go and work on a building site at 6 or 7 in the morning. Exhausted, tired men coming back in the evening, being humiliated. That is what daily occupation is about. And I just wish people would understand that, because the opposition to the building of the wall, the opposition to the settler roads, the opposition to the taking of land by the new settlements, and the way in which farmers find their land divided, it's the humiliation that goes with it. And as Mustafa Barghouti has explained, in the West Bank, the process is of peaceful, non-violent resistance. And then they find themselves mown down by the Israeli occupying forces. In Gaza, as I said in my earlier contribution, water supply cut off, electricity supply cut off, a sewage system that doesn't work because there's no power, and an aquifer where the water should come from is now so polluted by raw sewage because the sewage system doesn't work, and fishermen who can't get out to sea because they're not allowed to. That is what occupation is about, and it's gone on for all of my lifetime. And surely to goodness, the rest of the world has got to wake up and recognize that there has to be an end to the occupation. That is fundamentally what it's about. I'll finish on this because I could go on for a long time about my impressions. On another visit, I went there post-Oslo Accord. Oslo Accord, very controversial for many Palestinians, but nevertheless, an accord was reached and the idea was to move forward. And there was a time when lots of building and development was going on. The airport had been developed in Gaza. I saw the airport for myself. Water supply system had been developed and so on. Lots of things happening. British overseas aid was helping a water supply system. And then when the next bombardment took place, specifically, the airport was destroyed, and what were actually stunningly beautiful airport buildings were destroyed with it. I mean, I'm not a great admirer of airports in general, but those buildings were quite something else. And also the water supply system that British overseas aid had developed was destroyed. And so the rest of the world needs to wake up and recognize that what's going on is criminal. It's murder that's going on of Palestinian people. And there are, as I said, quite a lot of people in Israel that also recognize this is simply unsustainable. And Britain's role has to be, as Andrew pointed out, to stop the arms sales, stop the military and security cooperation, and stop importing any weaponry as well from Israel. And whilst I was disappointed but not very surprised by President Biden's response, I hope that the strength of the progressive movements across the United States will change that. And I was very pleased with the statement by a lot of Congress people yesterday, as I'm pleased at the statements by a lot of British members of Parliament over the last few days, those in mainly Labour MPs, but also those in some of the other parties who've also expressed their horror of what's going on.
Thank you, Jeremy. I want to touch on that point that you raised there at the end about the arms sales, and introduce Andrew back if I can, who touched on this earlier. Andrew, I think you said, and I think we're right in saying that It's estimated that over £400 million in arms deals have been made to Israel since 2015. What is your perspective on the role that the UK plays in terms of supporting Israel's combat operations against the Palestinians?
Well, I think there's another dimension to it that we must also consider, not just the sort of involvement of the British, which not only includes the arms deals, but it includes training, it includes intelligence cooperation. An article by Declassified UK Today documents the sort of involvement of the British arms trade with Israel. And it's quite horrifying, given what this training and these bombs and missiles are being used for. But I think we also need to understand that after every incursion into the occupied territories, Israel holds an arms fair that basically trumpets the success of certain Israeli-made weaponry in the latest attack on the occupied territories. So it's actually taking the killing and the suffering of Palestinian people and using it to market Israeli weaponry. And, you know, when I researched The Shadow World, which was the first book on the global arms trade since 1977, since Anthony Sampson's great book, The Arms Bazaar, wherever I went in the world, Israeli arms dealers would turn up because Israeli society has become so militarized, the economy has become so dependent on the defense sector. And the reality is that the people who benefit from this arms trade, which is deeply corrupt, the most corrupt trade in the world, accounting for 40% of all corruption in world trade, are the very politicians and political parties who don't want to change it. The very politicians like Joe Biden, who received massive support from America's defense contractors for his election campaign, who, you know, what he says about Israel's right to defend itself is a complete distortion of the facts and chronology of the events of the last few weeks, as we are all aware. But it reminds me of Edward Said, the wonderful Palestinian intellectual, who said, you know, this is an example of power repeating untruths until they have the force of truth. So it's this very national security elite, the military leaders, the politicians, their political parties, the executives of defense companies around the world, who benefit from this sort of slaughter, from the suffering that we are seeing in Gaza at the moment. But in addition to which, I just want to make a very quick point about the fact that we have seen in countries like the United Kingdom, across Europe, in the United States of America, we have seen enormous efforts to try and silence critics of Israel and any criticism of Israel. That's manifested in the United Kingdom by, you know, one of the most anti-racist politicians this country has seen in the last 3.5 decades, who happens to be sitting on this panel with us, being described as a racist and an anti-Semite, ironically by a Labour member of parliament who benefited materially and personally from her family's company collaborating with the apartheid state in South Africa in the 1980s. But the reality is that the success of the BDS movement, as Mustafa mentioned, really struck fear into Israel and its supporters around the world. And so there has been this incredible attempt to silence critics. And the consequence of this silencing of legitimate, meaningful criticism of Israeli apartheid, of its brutal and illegal occupation of the occupied territories, is to enable and facilitate not only the daily suffering of the Palestinians in the occupied territories, as we've heard a bit about tonight, but also these sorts of brutal, murderous attacks that are going on at the moment. And again, just to say, our experience in the South African struggle against apartheid was a combination, as Mustafa said, of the majority of South Africans on the ground rising up against their oppressors, together with the most extraordinary solidarity around the world in a boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign that many Palestinians, that Jeremy Corbyn, many others around the world played an absolutely key role in. And that is what brought an end to apartheid in South Africa. And it is my belief that that is what is going to bring an end to apartheid in Israel and Palestine.
You're muted, Leon.
Liam, you're muted.
I failed as a host. I failed an hour in, and we avoided it up until that
All right,
moment.
we'll re-elect you, Liam. It's okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, sorry, if I can turn to Linda. Thank you, Andrew, I did say as well. If I can turn to Linda, I wanted to ask you a question about the Black Lives Matter movement and the global movement really against racial supremacy, and to ask if you think whether the impact of these campaigns has had any impact on how the current conflict, the current escalation is being viewed. And then also as a second part really, to ask whether you think that the establishment sort of democratic leaders, people like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who obviously, I mean, I've seen activists in the US today saying, you know, you kind of tied yourselves to Black Lives Matter, and a lot of us went out and campaigned and helped to get you elected. You know, considering that high level of support that they sort of gave to the movement, do you think that they will have to do a bit more or not?
You know, my focus right now, Liam, is on solidarity. And solidarity is the most powerful weapon we have against the oppressor. Black Palestinian solidarity in the United States is probably the most threatening form of solidarity and weapon against what is happening in Palestine, but really to address fascism and racism and supremacy all over the world. And so, as many people know, as a Palestinian American, I'm actually not really well known for my organizing around Palestinian rights in the United States. I'm actually known for working on the front lines against police brutality, working with families who have lost their children to police violence here in the United States, who often are Black or Latinos. And to see the type of solidarity coming out from Black voices is very important. The bottom line is Kamala Harris has to catch up with our Black Lives Matter movement, our movement for Black lives, our racial justice movements, whatever people want to call them. If Kamala Harris thinks that she's going to run for president in 2024 and not align on issues of justice and racial justice and equality across the world, it's just not going to work. And so for me, again, I'm not expecting much from this administration. I never expected much from this administration, particularly not on the issue of Israel-Palestine. We were really, Liam, in a conundrum. I mean, we didn't really have any choice in this matter. And I know that a lot of leftists and folks, you know, look at us and say, stop telling me, you know, vote, you know, between the lesser of two evils. But in fact, what we believed as organizers in the United States, that it wasn't the lesser of two evils, that it was literally fascist and someone who was also horrible on the issues, but happens to not be a fascist all the way. That's really what we were voting for here in the United States. But I think, again, and I believe the same in any country who has a democracy, all politics are local. And so watching the emergence of Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, and even watching even on a state level here in the United States, emerging democratic socialists who are winning office across the country, watching the rhetoric that is now happening that is more empathetic to Palestinians, and really watching the debate that our very own Senator Bernie Sanders in the United States running for president brought to the highest echelons of the Democratic Party. So again, we have a lot more work to do, Liam. I'm not really counting on this administration, unfortunately, but I am committed to the solidarity and the continuing of building power that will not only help the Palestinian people, but will help marginalized people across the world who have had to endure the impact of U.S. foreign policy. Liam, you're still on mute, my man.
I'm muted and unmuted myself at the same time somehow. I believe that Jeremy Corbyn has got a question for you, Linda, as well.
Linda, thanks for what you said and the way you put it. It seems to me kind of strange as an observer of the United States that the radical movements in the USA got together to support the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, were crucial in opposing the Vietnam War, and indeed helped to bring an end to the Vietnam War. I was there during the opposition to the Iraq War, and there were some incredible demonstrations and marches and things I went on, which helped to sort of frame the political debate around Iraq. But I've always found it very odd, the way in which all that anti-racist movements, solidarity movements have not so far brought Palestine center stage. Now, I'm impressed with the statements that have been made by various members of Congress and very encouraged by that. I think that is really very good indeed. But do you think that there's going to be the same kind of movements in the Senate and in the House as there were, which helped to bring legislative change to the anti-apartheid movement, various bills that were put through at that time? Do you think the same kind of movement will have that effect in solidarity with the people of Palestine? And are people across the USA totally shocked by what they've seen on their screens in the last few days? Because nobody in the world that has either access to a radio or a television can be unaware of what's happened in Palestine over the last week.
I appreciate that, Mr. Corbyn. I am in a state of mind and that I'm just going to tell you the truth. The truth is that in the United States of America, we have what we call progressives except for Palestine. People who are excellent around talking about white supremacy and advancing white supremacy, supporting undocumented immigrants in the United States, and even supporting marginalized people in other parts of the world. But when it comes to Palestine, a line gets drawn. And let me tell you why that line gets drawn here. It is actually quite dangerous to be a very loud, pro-Palestinian voice in the United States. In fact, there was an article that came out about me that I didn't know. It was a breaking news that Sheldon Adelson, who, as you know, now is rotting in hell somewhere, was spending millions of dollars to silence voices like mine. I was an example, including building dossiers, doing investigations and private investigations on our families. We have watched people literally be fired from national television like Mark Lamont Hill, people who have lost livelihood in the United States just for standing in solidarity with the Palestinian people. Unfortunately, even within philanthropy, we have watched organizations, including Black-led organizations like, for example, the Dream Defenders out of Florida, who have actually taken delegations to Palestine of Black activists to try to build those solidarity and relationships, be defunded for their very principled stances on Palestine. And so it is difficult here in the United States. It's difficult for people in Congress to speak up. And I'm not making excuses, because I'm a person that believes that you should speak truth to power no matter the consequences. The consequences, unfortunately, are tall here in the United States. But what I do believe is something that Dr. King said, you know, Mr. Corbyn, may not see the promised land, but I do believe that I have the responsibility and that the movements have the responsibility to plant those seeds in hopes that we will come to the place that you're speaking of, which is a Senate and a Congress who is empathetic to the Palestinian people, who center justice and who center equity around the world, who believe in diplomacy over war. I believe that those days are coming. We have proved, at least in a very short period of time, maybe just within the last 4 years, maybe 6 years, that we do have the power when Black and brown people, marginalized people organize together, that we can elect progressives who are going to say free Palestine, who are going to stand with the Palestinian people, but also people who believe in Medicare for all, people who believe in access to higher education. And so we found that the kind of politics of someone like Bernie Sanders was actually much broader than just Senator Bernie Sanders. And he really gave courage to a lot of people running for office to start putting those values on the table. And so we've only been through 2-3 mid-year election cycles, and there's many more to come, but I do see that hope. I mean, watching members of Congress on the House floor just shows us that what is the potential. And to your point, unfortunately, the Palestinian people are not being taught in public schools in America. In fact, in the state of California, we have been in a long-term fight where their opposition pro-Israel lobby has tried to remove Palestine and Arab American studies from the larger curriculum around Arab American studies, around minority studies, ethnic studies. So even when we are saying, listen, all we want for you is to educate about the communities we come from in the same way that you educate about others, everything we do here in the States requires a fight. Our Palestinian communities are fighting in Palestine, and they also have to fight here, and our allies have to fight with us. So again, the work is happening, the organizing is happening, the Black Lives Matter movement, the movement for Black Lives has centered and endorsed the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. We have seen a lot more integration of Palestine as the current global social justice issue of our time. We see a lot of comparisons with South African apartheid fight, and people basically saying, if you would have stood up against South African apartheid, then this is your moment now on Palestine. And so again, there's a lot of work to be done. I've been doing this work for 2 decades now, and I have seen the progress. And unfortunately, until we figure out how to build the same type of organizing, the same type of consistency, and also to invest the same type of money as we have seen the pro-Israel lobby, we're not going to move as fast as we can. But what I am seeing, Mr. Corbyn, that I think is so heartwarming and really hopeful here is that the entire pro-Israel propaganda machine in the United States of America is literally crumbling before our very eyes. I mean, we have watched celebrities and athletes and people who never, ever brought up Palestine, said anything about Palestine coming out. We are watching organizations that never had the courage to even mention Palestine, talk about Palestine. And the most beautiful part is watching young Jewish progressives, young Jews who are literally risking their own positions within their larger community, coming out, organizing events, leading conversations, lobbying Congress, standing in solidarity with our movements here, and really centering the voices of Palestinians. And so I'm encouraged, but again, so much more work to do.
Thank you, Linda. And thank you so much for your time and for your voice and solidarity to you. I understand that you've got to head off. But yeah, thank you so much again. And of course, from everybody on the panel and from all of our audience.
Absolutely. Thank you to my brothers here. Palestine is going to be free, inshallah, one day in our lifetime. And I'm honored to know that there are people like you in this world who are steadfast, who are courageous, and who are brave. And we will continue to speak truth to power, no matter the consequences, because no matter what we will endure, it will never be anything close to what the Palestinian people are enduring today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Linda. Absolutely brilliant. I'm sure we're going to be working together in the future.
Yes, we are. I wasn't trying to fangirl, Mr. Corbyn, but I just want you to know how honored that I'm even on this platform with you. So thank you so much. And I definitely want to be in touch with you and hopefully visit you sometime soon.
Don't give over. We're all human beings together, and we campaign together, and we work together, and we achieve together.
That's right.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you very much. And if I can turn quickly, we've not got too much time left now. I want to put some questions to all of the panel now. Mustafa, if I can come to you first, I want to play a clip from Mehdi Hassan's show where an Israeli spokesman was asked a question about the two-state solution. And I want to come to this question in general, but I'll play the clip for you all and for our viewers now.
And we're totally out of time. So one last question, yes or no? I can only take a yes or no. You speak for the Israeli government. Does the Israeli government support a two-state solution?
We promised under the Trump peace plan to keep the path for a Palestinian statehood open, and this is the policy of the Israeli government.
So not a yes. Elad Strohmeyer, thank you so much for your time tonight. I appreciate it.
As Mehdi notes there, it wasn't a yes, and there was quite a pause before he answered as well. I mean, what do you think is the reality for the two-state solution now, Mustafa?
Well, thank you for this question. If I may, before answering it, I want just to say a short comment about what Linda was talking about regarding the situation in the United States. I think what we need as Palestinians is more organization. I mean, because we are encountering a very tough lobby, and it's a bit unfair because you are talking here about a Jewish lobby that has been built on 5 generations probably of people who lived in the United States. And while Palestinians in the best case scenario, they have the 2nd generation maybe. There is a big difference in terms of the level of organization as well as in terms of the resources, the financial resources that are used for the lobbying. But I think what she said is very correct, that there is a much better organization now than before. But there is another side to it, which is that the mistake that was committed by a PLO after signing Oslo Agreement. In my opinion, the Oslo Agreement, and that links to your next question about two-state solution. The Oslo Agreement, in my opinion, was a big trap built for the PLO and the Palestinian leadership, and it fell in it. Why? Because it was a terrible agreement which we all opposed, me and Haidar Abdeshafi, who used to be the leader of the Palestinian negotiating team, and the Oslo agreement was cooked from behind his back. And we always thought we should never sign an agreement before Israel provides assurance and is committed to complete and total block of settlement activities. This is exactly what the PLO did not do. And eventually we ended up with no state and with the increased number of settlements. The PLO, since signing Oslo Agreement, started to behave as if it was a government of a real state. And instead of sustaining its relationship with liberation movements, with progressive people, with alliances it should build with the African American community, with progressive women movement, it concentrated only on diplomatic relationships with governments. That happened not only in the United States, but also in Europe and in other places. And that cost us a lot, actually. Today, what you see is that the popular grassroots movement, which we are part of, is rebuilding these alliances outside the marginalized official structure. Now, about the two-state solution. In my opinion, Israel never wanted a Palestinian state. I did not find in any statement by Yitzhak Rabin, who's perceived as the most peaceful Israeli leader, or Shimon Peres, or anybody else, any real statement about the establishment of a real Palestinian state. All they spoke about is self-governing authority under Israeli military control and Israeli security control. And Oslo Agreement did not provide for the establishment of a true Palestinian state. What happened by building illegal settlements in the occupied territories is that Israel was destroying the potential and the possibility of two-state solution. Whenever a state is mentioned by any Israeli, it is mentioned as not as a real sovereign state, but as some sort of self-governing entity or authority under Israeli control. And what Trump's plan was providing for, and Trump's plan was nothing but Netanyahu's ideas, was to establish some kind of self-governing structure in less than 40% of the West Bank. And you could call it an empire if you want, but it would be nothing but a Bantustan government. And exactly this is what they have done to the Palestinian Authority today. They have transformed it into a Bantustan government, where Israel is controlling the land, controlling the water resources, controlling the passages, controlling the movement, to the level that even the president of the Palestinian Authority cannot leave or go or come back without an Israeli permission. So this is the reality of today. And when we speak about a state, it is very important to clarify, what do we mean by the state? Is it a state over the whole of occupied territories in 1967, including all of West Bank and Gaza, as well as East Jerusalem? Or it is something that will be established in fragmented territories in the West Bank? In my opinion, during the last few years, Israel has destroyed to a large extent the potential for two-state solution. And while politically, as Palestinians, we cannot say we do not want a Palestinian state if it is provided for, we have to also understand that the solution might not happen unless we reach a balance of power, which forces Israel really to withdraw not only the occupation, but as Jeremy said, also all the legal settlements. You cannot have a state with settlements on the ground. And that's why I say the potential is for two options. Either we manage very quickly to change the balance of power to the level that Israel will be forced to leave the West Bank completely, including East Jerusalem, and allow the establishment of a Palestinian state without ignoring the right of the Palestinian refugees to come back to the homes they were displaced from. Or the only option will be one state solution with full democratic rights for everybody, with complete equality. In that sense, this would be the real solution, but it cannot be achieved without removing and completely destroying the whole apartheid system in the whole of Palestine, and not just in the occupied territories. So While my heart wants to see a state established as quickly as possible, my brain tells me it is so complicated, unless, of course, we manage to change the balance of power very quickly. The most important thing to say here is that I haven't seen up till now any serious Israeli party, any Zionist Israeli party, that agrees with the establishment of a Palestinian state. And if you want to check that, ask them what do they think about the right of the Palestinians to have a capital in Jerusalem. Ask them whether they agree or disagree with removing all the settlers from the West Bank. And you will immediately discover that all Zionist parties are against that. And that's why I say you cannot speak about left Zionist or right Zionist. If you are a Zionist, you cannot be on the left, and you cannot be democratic, and you cannot be a real participant in building a peace process.
Jeremy, if I could just ask you a similar question on the points that have been made there about your own reflections on the future of the sort of two-state solution, and also perhaps I know your interest on the role of the United Nations and the international community as well.
Mustafa gives a very good description of the problems of the Oslo Agreement and the lack of inclusion of the question of the settlers from the West Bank. Because if you look at the West Bank as it is now, there are, sorry? Have you got me still?
You are in.
Sorry, you've got 500,000 settlers across the West Bank, and under the Trump-supported plan of annexation, it would have got even worse. And I have to say that I don't think the annexation plan has disappeared. I just think it's been put on hold for a bit. And this latest bombardment may well be part of that whole strategy. I'm not sure. And you've got settler roads where Palestinian people can't go. And so if you say there is a Palestinian state based on the West Bank, there isn't, because a state would have effective administrative control over the whole of its territory. And it's quite obvious the Palestinian Authority does not. It does not control what goes on in the settlements. It does not control entrance and exit from Gaza. It does not control exit and entrance to Jerusalem. And so it doesn't exist at the present time. I wanted to fully recognize the state of Palestine, including recognition of all of the land of the West Bank and of Gaza. And so the 1967 borders would be the point we're talking about, pre-67 borders, but that is not the case. And so you then have to ask yourself the question, well, where do we go from here? Because the United Nations does recognize the right of Palestinian people to be represented at the UN. President Abbas can speak, the equivalency of any other president or head of government at the UN, and the UN Relief and Works Agency, the oldest agency of the UN, still exists. Grotesquely underfunded during the Trump years, a bit better now, but it's not the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, valuable and so on as it is. It's not the answer. The answer's got to be end of the siege of Gaza, removal of all of the settlements, and end of the settlement policy. And I think what's interesting in the past week has been that everything's kicked off around Sheikh Jarrah. Now, I've been to Sheikh Jarrah. I've seen what happens there, where a settler group move in and try to remove the family from a home and gradually take over Palestinian homes. And I remember some, to me, utterly bizarre argument I had with some settlers when I visited Sheikh Jarrah. They were harassing an elderly Palestinian lady. You know, it was disgusting, way, just quite disgraceful. So myself and a couple of other people who were visiting with me then confronted them and said, what are you doing? Why are you so appalling and you're abominable in your attitude and language towards this elderly Palestinian lady? And all I got was monosyllabic answers saying, it's ours. She doesn't have any right to be here. It was her home. And that is one settlement in one city, and that is part of the settlement policy in Jerusalem. Same as Silwan, City of David, and so on, and all that is repeated all across. The settlements have got to go. And then, so long as the world doesn't stand up to Israel for its breach of international law on this, for the imprisonment of children, for the denying of medical aid to Palestinian people, then Israel's occupying forces will carry on doing that. Now, I think the protests in Israel by Palestinians living within the within Israel are important, and also some of the voices of some of the political groups in Israel. But Mustafa gives us an uncomfortable truth that, in my observation, most of the political parties in Israel will not unequivocally say settlements must end and those settlers must go back within the borders of Israel. And until they do, then you have to say, well, where is the opposition in Israel to Israel's policy in respect of Palestine? That's not to say there aren't a lot of very brave people in Israel, and I have to say that I've worked closely with people in Israel who've been opposed to their government's policy, and Gus Shalom people are very honest in their determination to bring about a different approach and a different policy, but they've got a big uphill struggle. I think we should support them in that struggle, and the best support we can give is to support the Palestinian people in their struggle for their own right to their own self-determination. I'll finish on this. Look, nobody in Gaza wants to live at the behest of UNRWA. Nobody on the West Bank wants to be constantly under checkpoint control and everything else. The people of Gaza want to work. They want to use their skills to develop industries, enterprises, and all the other things that people want to achieve in life. Just imagine when it's growing up as a child, knowing you can't go anywhere, you can't travel, you'll never be able to see the world other than through a computer screen. That affects people's mentality. And I remember talking to Dr. Muna Farah about mental health in Gaza. And her view was that 70% of the people of Gaza are suffering mental health depression because of the situation they're living in. That's what the occupation and the siege of Gaza does to people.
May I add one very quick point? Actually, there is a lot of hypocrisy when it comes to the issue of two-state solution, because especially from the side of many Western governments, they all speak about two-state solution, and they all speak about this as the only possible solution. But then you ask them, why, since you support two-state solution and all of you recognize Israel, why don't you recognize the state of Palestine?
Correct.
Why Sweden is the only country that dared to do so, and it's being punished for that? Why Germany does not do that? Why France doesn't do it? Why Italy doesn't do it? Why Spain does not do it? I mean, why Britain, of course, does not do it? So I think there is a certain level of hypocrisy, and I am afraid here that the whole talk about two-state solution and about negotiations is only one way of running away from their responsibility. And their responsibility is really to say to Israel, enough is enough. They keep talking about negotiations while we have a record of 30 years where negotiations were used as a substitute to a solution. And negotiations have been used and as a substitute to real peace. It's only one way of distraction so that these countries will not carry their responsibility of saying to Israel, enough is enough. Stop your occupation. They don't want to do that, and they keep throwing us into this endless cycle of useless negotiations without any results.
Thank you very much. We are going to sort of bring things to a close now, but before I do, I want to come to each of our guests with the one question that has been asked repeatedly both by Double Down News patrons, but also in the comments tonight, in people who have been sending in questions. Just a quick reminder to everybody that is watching to please like the video on YouTube, to share the video, and also to subscribe to this channel on YouTube. But the question that is being asked is, what can we do? And I guess that means everybody as individuals across the world, internationally, but also I guess yourselves as individuals in your own positions as well. How do we press for an end to the occupation, given the undermining of international law? What advice would you use in terms of the tactics that we can use to end the apartheid? And I'm going to come to Andrew first, if I may.
Thanks, Liam. From my perspective, it's very clear what individuals can do. And that is, and this applies also to campaigning groups, is to push our governments at every level, wherever in the world we are. So in the United Kingdom, at local authority level, at national level, to demand an immediate arms embargo on Israel as part of a broader strategy of boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel until the brutal and illegal occupation of Palestine comes to an end. And I want to conclude my remarks by saying something that a child survivor of the Warsaw Ghetto wrote that I think is incredibly germane to the situation on the ground in Gaza tonight as we are talking about these issues. Irina Klepfus, whose father was murdered in the Warsaw Ghetto, wrote, "I have concluded that one way to pay tribute to those we love, who struggled, resisted, and died, is to hold on to their fierce outrage at the destruction of the ordinary life of their people. It is this outrage we must use to fuel our actions and visions whenever we see signs of the disruptions of common life. The hysteria of a mother grieving for the teenager who has been shot, a family stunned in front of a vandalized or demolished home, a family separated, displaced, arbitrary and unjust laws that demand the closing and opening of shops and schools, humiliation of a people whose culture is alien and deemed inferior, a people left homeless without citizenship, a people living under military rule." She said, "Because of our experience, we recognize these evils as obstacles to peace. At these moments of recognition, we remember the past, feel the outrage that inspired the Jews of the Warsaw Ghetto, and allow it to guide us in our present struggles." And when I think of that in the context of apartheid South Africa, where the majority of South Africans endured decades and decades of very, very dark days, like the people of Palestine are experiencing today, let us not forget that apartheid South Africa was defeated. It was defeated by South Africans on the ground rising up against their rulers, their oppressors, supported extraordinarily by people all over the world through a boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign under the banner of the international anti-apartheid movement. So what we can do is we can support those sorts of activities wherever we are to bring a halt to what is happening in Gaza today, but what has been happening in Palestine for far too long. Thank you so much, Liam, for having me on.
Thank you, Andrew. And Jeremy, if I can come to you next.
Thank you very much, and thank you for hosting this program, and thank you for Double Down News for putting it on tonight. It's very impressive. And there are thousands of people watching us on screens tonight all over the world. Thank you for joining us this evening. It's in our own hands what we can do. The Palestinian people are under occupation. We've seen the brutality of the bombing, and we've seen the horrors of the effects of it. Children being killed, buildings being destroyed, families left bereft. On top of that, the daily grind of the occupation carries on. So, solidarity around the world means protests, it means taking to the streets, it means demanding of your politicians and your political leaders that they act, it means unequivocal, unconditional recognition of the state of Palestine. And with that, the demand of all settlements to be removed, the siege of Gaza to end, the rights of refugees to be recognized, and the rights of the free movement of Palestinian people across their land to be recognized. That means we have to take action, ending arms trade, security deals with Israel. It means recognizing that we, all of us, who believe in peace, in justice, in human rights and democracy, have got to stand up alongside the Palestinian people in achieving that. And stand with those people in every country around the world, including Israel, who think the same thing. That is how we will help. But basically, liberation always comes from people's own actions. So we have to support and recognize the heroic resistance that Palestinian people are making against the occupation. Mustafa, at demonstrations all the time that are often broken up or attacked with gunfire by the occupying forces all across the West Bank. That is what the daily life is about. And so we do make a difference by our voices. We do make a difference by our demonstrations. We do make a difference by our demands on our media to properly report what is happening to the Palestinian people. And it's no surprise that the Israeli jets bombed the offices of Al Jazeera and the Press Association and others in Gaza in the last few days. No surprise at all. We've got to keep on supporting those real brave journalists that expose the truth about the arms sales, the arms deals, the security cooperation, and the surveillance systems that are used against Palestinian people. I want to see peace, but you only get peace with justice, with respect, and with recognition. End the occupation now.
Thank you, Jeremy, for your strong words. And
but I just add, Liam, I fought the general election in a manifesto commitment, the first time ever in British history that a mainstream political party had put forward a proposal that an incoming Labour government would recognise the state of Palestine. And I absolutely stand by that commitment.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you indeed. And if I can pass now finally to Mustafa to finish tonight's show really, and to offer your own thoughts on what people can do.
Well, thank you so much. First of all, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to be on this panel. It's really been an honor to be with Andrew, with Linda, and definitely with Jeremy Corbyn, who's a close friend. And I'm so proud of what you do and what you have done and how much you sacrificed to sustain your principled position in support of Palestine. I think there are three things that I would recommend or suggest to the people who are watching us today. The first thing is I believe in a very simple fact, which is that knowledge is always the beginning. And that's why I think one of the main things we need from the people who understand the Palestinian cause and support it is to bring the truth to the people they know, to their families, to their friends, to their work partners, to the media in the country they live in. It is so important to write about the Palestinian issue, to speak about the Palestinian issue. Please never underestimate how important it is to bring the knowledge to the people around you, because unfortunately, many people have been subjected to the wrong narrative and to a misleading presentation of the situation of Palestine and to a lot of dehumanization of the Palestinian people. The second thing that I believe people can do is to pressure their politicians, their members of parliament, those who represent them, their congressmen, their congresswomen. I think they can do a lot by pressuring these people, because these politicians are mainly thinking constantly about being re-elected, and your opinion matters to them. So that's and especially if your opinion is organized well, and if you can exercise pressure in groups. So I think this is the second very important point, where we can translate what we are asking, like withholding military aid to Israel into a real action by the politicians. The third point, which is the most important one, in my opinion, is to participate in the boycott, divestment, sanctions campaign, individually at the public level, or jointly while deciding the policies of markets, of supermarkets, of marketplaces, or of governments, actually. And please don't, I think BDS is the most effective way, and I hope people can join it. But finally, I want to say two things about, I remember, I don't know if people have watched that, but I hope they will. And I'm sure Andrew knows about it. It was an interview with Nelson Mandela when he visited, during his first visit to the United States, I think after he was released from prison, and before elections took place, I think, in South Africa. So it was at a time when Mandela needed a lot of support from the United States. And Ted Koppel held an open meeting with him, a town hall meeting. And the main point that he was pressuring him on was the question of Palestine. And he wanted Nelson Mandela to apologize for his positions in supporting the Palestinian people at a time when the Zionist movement was so powerful in the United States. And Nelson Mandela was so fantastic in his principled position of insisting on the Palestinian rights. And he turned at one point to Ted Koppel and said to him, listen, you want me to stand up and to stand now against the people who supported me while nobody supported me in the world. And that's something I will always remember as an example of principled position when people are under pressure. And excuse me, Jeremy, for saying that, but I also followed how much you were pressured, how much you were accused of anti-Semitism, wrongly, of course, how much you suffered, and I know you sacrificed many things in your own political life because of Palestine. And for that, we admire what you have done and the principled positions you've taken. So my message to the people, be courageous. Be like these courageous people and stand up to your principles and believe that we will succeed. Believe we will eventually overcome, as the people in South Africa have done. And thank you so much again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mustafa. I want to say a huge thank you to all of our panel for joining us tonight. Mustafa Barghouti, Jeremy Corbyn, Andrew Finestein, Linda Sarsour, and to all of you for watching. Thank you to our patrons for making this possible, and to everybody who has got involved tonight. If you want to see more of this sort of broadcast from Double Down News, and you want to support the alternative analysis that we provide, please do visit our Patreon page and join us today. I will finish myself by saying that our hearts and solidarity go out to the people of Palestine tonight and always. And let us remember that in our thousands, in our millions, we are all Palestinians. Thank you very much and good night.
Wow. I think, am I mute myself? I think that was worth, thank you very much for hanging in. And Samia from Jordan for hanging in. I think this was a very important program. I'm going to make a YouTube of it and upload it so people who couldn't stand, but there was a lot of really interesting information. And I just got some updates from Gaza during the show, and they said for the third time in a row, the Security Council fails to issue a statement regarding Israeli aggression on Gaza. No surprise. And then a miracle from Gaza. A baby was rescued from under rubble after the house was destroyed by Israel, and they pulled out this baby alive. And this is the latest update, 209 Palestinians killed, including 56 children. It's just heartbreaking. And 33 women. And another 5,687 wounded in the aggression. So this is just heartbreaking. So I'm going to put on my Palestine cap. I have my dress I got in Jerusalem. And I actually got it from my Jewish neighbor who was 102, just passed away. And she wanted me to have her Palestinian dress. I got it for her. She wanted to go to a family wedding, her Jewish family wedding, wearing a dress from Jerusalem. So anyhow, I'm going to wave my Palestinian flag and have my Palestinian cap and sending you my love. Samia, love to you in Jordan. I'll see you in a couple months. I'm going to Jordan in July, so I'll be doing these programs from Amman and maybe actually from Jerusalem if I can get over the border if things calm down. I had planned to spend a couple weeks volunteering at a peace center in Hebron. So I'm hoping that in July and August, I'll be doing these programs from Jordan and from Palestine. So thanks so much for everybody. Wonderful to see you all, and I'll see you next week, and pray for Palestine. BDS forever. Okay, bye-bye.